Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters, and today I'm joined by Emma Cummings, and we are going to be talking about the differences between home educating in England and home educating in Scotland. And I want to do a podcast from each of the different bits of the UK, because I know that the generic approach to home education and the advice that's given tends to be English-centred, and yet this is ridiculous because we have lots of home educators in Wales, which is where I am, lots of home educators in Scotland, and also lots of home educators in Northern Ireland. And I know, because I'm actually in Ireland at the moment, that a lot of Irish home educators go to Northern Ireland for their home education, particularly for exam centres. And so I really wanted to do a podcast from each of the regions. Now, I have Emma with me today to talk about Scotland. I am very much hoping to have somebody with me to talk about Wales in the next couple of weeks. I have nobody from Northern Ireland, so if anybody is listening that knows anyone from Northern Ireland that might like to come on the podcast, do put a comment in any of the places where you listen to this podcast, and I will find you, and I will hopefully find that person who can come and speak to us about Northern Ireland. But today it's Scotland. So Emma, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we have a little tradition on the show, which is that my very first question is always, tell me a little bit about yourself and your home education journey.
Okay, well, I'm Emma and I'm in Scotland. I live just outside of Edinburgh and I have 7 children. My eldest is 19 and my youngest will be 2 next week, actually. And we have always home educated. We started home educating my daughter when she was 4.5, and we've just continued right through high school level. So my daughter finished, we did A-levels at home with her, and she's had a couple of years just kind of finding what she wants to do, and she's travelled a bit. So she starts university next week, actually, and my 17-year-old son's just started college. And then I've got a 15-year-old who's kind of starting kind of IGCSE type stuff, and a 12-year-old, and then a little gap, and I've got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and the 2-year-old who is, he's in the mix running around. Yes, that's us. All very busy.
Wow, very busy. And also, you've seen all the different spectrums then of home education, from the very little ones to the end.
Yes, absolutely. So I find it really interesting at the stage I am now, because at the minute, I'm basically at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end, all at the same time. And having that really overarching view of home education, and also that the look at, like, I'm just started phonics with my 5-year-old, and the things when if it's your first child, you're like, oh no, is she going to be able to read? Am I going to damage her and break her? And you think, no, it'll be fine. They read. Even I've had a few dyslexic children who really struggled with reading, and they can read. So things like that is, I think, as a home educator, I've really kind of mellowed and become less terrified at every problem that we have as we encounter it, because they do mature in their own pace. They learn at their own pace, and they do all get there in the end. So I'm really actually quite enjoying going back to the younger years with the wee ones, and being able to just do all these fun little things, because let's be honest, when you hit exams can really rob the joy of education. And I think that's another thing I've really learned with my daughter. It seems so pressurised doing the exams, and with my boys I've really I'm not as stressed. I want them to enjoy their education, and it not become this really pressurised thing to get the exams, because it can be so stressful. And when you've had a lovely kind of gentle homeschooling day, and now suddenly it's like, we need to do the A-levels, you need to get all this content, you've got this exam coming up, it does put pressure on and robs the joy a little bit.
It does, and I've done quite a few podcasts about A levels or home educating kind of through to 18, because my son has just did his A levels this summer and obviously we homeschooled through that. And it is interesting. You're so right. I think if I had younger ones, because my two are now 16 and 18, and that's it. I don't have any younger ones. But I would approach things really quite differently, because like you say, there's a relaxation to it. There's a confidence about how things work, and also you take the knowledge that you've gained from your trial runs, your early children, and you can apply it to the younger ones that come after.
Yeah.
So talk to me about home educating in Scotland, because I've home educated all the way through. As I say, my children have just done their A levels, my daughter's just done her GCSEs. And I know all about the English system, and I know a little bit about the Welsh system because we've been in Wales for the last 5 years or so. But I don't know very much about the Scottish system, and I know it's different. So talk to me about the main differences when you home educate in Scotland compared to, say, for example, England.
So I think the main differences are, initially, if you have a child in school and you want to remove them to begin home education, that is a big difference. Just the process to do that is different. And the second difference is the exam system. And the Scottish exam system is different from the English exam system. The general nuts to bolts of how we home educate are basically the same. As we all do the same approach. We do what's right for our families. We all have different ideologies, and in Scotland, just like in England, there's not that government oversight telling you don't need to do the national curriculum, for example. You don't need to follow these steps. You do have that autonomy that is across the UK. So the main differences is that initial starting point, and obviously exams. So if you would decide you want to home educate your child, and you have never registered a child, and so your child's never attended a local primary school, or you can just home educate. You don't need to notify the local authority. You don't need to tell a school. You just start. So that was what we were like. My daughter never attended school. She actually attended the local nursery, state nursery, when she was 3 to 4.5, and she just didn't go to primary one. And so we never notified the local authority that we were doing that. We just started. I'm not sure. I think this might be different from England. If you have said to a local primary school, we want a place in the local primary school, but they don't set foot in the building for day one of primary one, you don't need consent. And I believe, from just reading the different forums, I think this can be a stickler for some families, because different schools because it doesn't seem like it should be that. It doesn't feel that's what the law would say, because it just seems a bit loopholey, weird, and inconsistent, but that's what it says. And so I think some families have fallen foul to the local authorities and then written a letter of seeking consent when they didn't need to. If your child goes on day one, finishes day one, then you decide, I'm going to take them out and we're not doing this. You then need to write a letter of consent to the local authority. So if your child attended that school, if it's primary school or high school, they need to send a letter to the local authority with requesting the consent to withdraw. I've read over the legislation and the wording is very woolly, and I can see why in Scotland home educators can struggle a bit with this whole process, because in Scotland the legislation says you do not need permission to home educate, but the local authority can refuse, under reasonable conditions, consent to withdraw. And those conditions are pretty extreme. Like, for example, you've got a history of serious child protection issues. They would maybe say no, and that's a whole other conversation. But just your average family, you're not going to be withdrawn consent, refused consent to withdraw. However, local authorities will not look kindly if you take your child out before you're given that consent. And this is a bit of a grey area, because a lot of families will say, well, we don't need permission, so we can start. And it's the language around this area is just very woolly. And then you've got but then the local authority will send you'll be basically getting letters for your child not attending school. If you have a child who you're withdrawing because your child has health issues, maybe they're getting bullied, or there's mental health issues, and the school environment is just very detrimental to them, you would need to get a letter from the GP to say this is why they're not attending. And I think in those situations, if you've got that relationship, schools are very understanding. They can see that a child is struggling. They can see they're being bullied. Obviously, there's situations where the relationship between the family and the local authority or the school has broken down, and that in those situations, families need to really do everything in writing, so you've got this paper trail of evidence. That's the basis of you need that letter of consent. You will also be asked to outline your provision. How do you seek to provide an education for this child?
Is that when you apply for consent, you have to say that?
Yes. Yes. You outline this is our plan. And here's another part of this whole process that becomes, because it says the legislation, things like we suggest or we advise, it's not black and white. So they advise local authorities to visit parents in their home or to have an annual checkup with a family. It is not a legally mandated visit. And this can lead to friction between local authorities and families.
Before we move on to visits, because I'd like to ask about how that works, when it comes to the consent, because in England, for example, we're very big on the fact that you would tell the school that you're deregistering and that it's your right to deregister, not that you're asking. It sounds to me like even though you do have the right to deregister, that it's like you say, it's a little bit of a grey area, and so you're kind of asking, is it okay if I deregister? And chances are most of the time it is, unless there's sort of extreme. So how long does the consent period take?
It's meant to take 6 weeks. They say in the legislation, they say this process should take 6 weeks. It often takes less, but sometimes it takes longer. Again, there's nothing in the framework that is a definite parameter for families. When you read a lot of the discussions on home ed forums in Scotland, all these problems that this badly written legislation come up, and you'll have families who have very strong ideological views on the parental right to home education. They're like, no, the law does not say this. It's all that this kind of woolly language of suggest and you may want to, and not this is what you have to do. And they say, no, it doesn't say that, so I'm not going to give you access to my children or to what we're doing. I'm not going to let you overstep your authority in our family.
During the consent period, I think you implied that unless you have a good relationship with the school, your child might really need to stay in school until that consent is given.
They would want you, yes. But obviously a lot of families, if the relationship is broken down, it's not broken down for no good reason. And a lot of the reasons are linked to the anxiety for a child. The child might be school refusing. They're like, I'm not going to that place, because they can have massive anxiety if they're being bullied. A lot of families their kids are neurodivergent and they just cannot cope in that school environment. And the parents it does lead to problems, and there are families who will end up having the local authorities writing to them. Sometimes social work does get involved in very extreme cases, which is really sad, because it just puts more stress, more pressure, more tension on the family and those kids who really are just needing to back off because they're not coping in that environment.
Yeah, that's really difficult because 6 weeks, like you say, could be a very long time if your
Yes.
child is really traumatized by the school experience. Okay, so is there anything else in the deregistering process that we need to think about?
There's a few kind of you don't need consent, get out clauses. Firstly, if your child is moving from primary to high school, you don't need to ask for consent. You just don't send them to the local high school. Also, if you're moving between local authorities, so if you're leaving a school in the local authority you live in and you're moving to a new local authority, you wouldn't need consent in that situation. And if your child is in an independent school, you wouldn't need consent from the local authority and if
Okay,
they're going from nursery to primary.
so it's transitions. If there's a natural
Yeah.
transition, then you don't need consent. Okay, that's really interesting. So once your child is out of school and you've got the consent, talk to me then about the visits and, allowing people into your home or not into your home, or reports and all of that stuff.
Another problem with the legislation is because of the how it's written, local authorities interpret it differently. So you'll have local authorities who are really quite heavy-handed and will really want to have those annual visits in place. And then you'll have local authorities who just kind of basically do pretty much leave you alone. And it just depends who's in charge of that department and that local authority and how they are interpreting the legislation.
What does the legislation actually say then? I mean, because I know that in the UK, in England, it says something along the lines of that you have to say that you have to provide a suitable education, but you don't have to allow people into your home. If they ask for an annual report, you do have to give it, but it can be in any form. So I know this kind of thing, but what does the legislation say in Scotland?
It says it's things like we suggest that you have an annual visit. We suggest that you follow up with families on an annual basis. So it's all this. I'm trying to find the actual wording
So again, it's
of it.
quite woolly and it's quite
It's
vague.
very woolly and very, very vague. The families who I know who have removed their children from school, I pre-COVID they did have some annual visits. I think post-COVID those families had phone calls once a year.
Can you
And
decline an annual visit?
you can, because it's not actually written in. You can decline a lot of families decline the annual visit. They say, can you please do everything in writing with me? And so yes, they can. A lot of families are scared to, because it then flags them up as why do you not want to engage with us? So there's that element of discrimination, especially for families who maybe are got neurodivergence in their home, who maybe are not as highly educated as they're from a lower educational background, a lower socioeconomic background. These families are the ones who get kind of discriminated against and really struggle within the system. If you're this kind of nice model middle class family, and you've got the right language to talk to them, you can fly. They're pretty much hands off. You get a light-handed approach from them. So it's a big. The people who are lobbying for the rights of home educators in Scotland, this is a big part of their work, is that the equality and this very postcode lottery approach to how home educators are treated.
Yeah, and I know that in a lot of the in a lot of the Facebook groups and the home education Facebook groups, occasionally you get people coming in saying, no, why are everyone so against people coming in? I don't mind. I had a very lovely officer. They came in, or, I've got no problem with people checking up. And of course, like you say, it's about protecting the people that maybe don't have the confidence or don't have the verbal skills or the written skills to be able to produce the reports or to be able to advocate for themselves and their children. So that's why the rest of us kind of bang that drum a little bit. Okay, so it sounds to me like once the child is out and you got consent, it's a similarish process to home education in the UK more widely. Is there, I know that, or at least I believe that this is the case. I haven't done the Welsh podcast yet, but I believe this is the case, that in Wales, if you go to see a doctor or whatever and you home educate, that it kind of gets flagged up into the system, or there's a duty to report that. Is it similar in Scotland, do you know?
If you're at the GP or if you roll up at A&E, they will always ask what school your child goes to put down on their records. I don't know if you can refuse to tell them. I think I've just always said, oh, we home educate, and I think not until recently, whenever I actually began to think but the wider implications of the kind of overstep of local authorities, those wider implications, because I think I've always been kind of in this little bubble of, well, I'm fine, don't mind people, and so I would always just say, so I don't actually know if there'd be an issue if you did say, I'm not telling you.
Okay, so once you're out and you're home educating, I think you mentioned that the next big difference, or the second big difference, is the exam system. So talk to me about the exam system, because you've obviously been through it a few times already.
Yes, so in Scotland, exam system in Scotland, in the Scottish school system, is run by the Scottish Qualifications Authority, the SQA. And Scottish high school kids would sit Nat 5s, which are like GCSEs, and then Highers and Advanced Highers, which are kind of your level course. Most of these courses require coursework. Only, I think, maths doesn't, from what I can think about. I think only maths is the one that doesn't have any coursework.
That's the Nat 5s and the Highers and the Advanced Highers of them.
Yes. There may be one that I can't think about, but maths is actually fine. Therefore, it is very hard to sit Scottish qualifications in Scotland. We don't have exam centres that allow for independent candidates to sit. There are cases where parents have got a good relationship with local high schools, and they have in the past let them sit exams in local high schools. There's one exam centre now in Scotland that is an independent exam centre for SQA exams in Glasgow. And I'm starting to see the Highlands and Islands University are actually working. They had a really good reputation for working with local home educators in the Highlands. And when I looked at it for my own kids, it was basically for kids in the Highlands. Just recently I've seen actually that it's opening up more to the whole of Scotland, where they're doing online SQA exams.
These are the nationals that you talked about, the SQA exams. So how do you get around the coursework element then?
You can't, that's the problem. So if you're doing it at this place in Glasgow, because they're registered, they would be able to do that. And the Highlands and Islands universities, they can do that as well.
They sign off your coursework.
Yes. I don't know how they would do, but they've been able to get that recognition to be able to run Nat 5s and Highers in that way. The consequence is most of us who pursue exams sit the English exam system. So my daughter did IGCSEs, and then she did Highers. We did do A-levels. She did 2 A-levels, and we did do 2 Highers. One was through our local authorities. Some local authorities, once your child hits 16, will have night classes where you can do a very narrow range of Highers and Nat 5s. and it's adult learning. So she did I think she'd higher human biology as a night class, and it was all adult. It was most, I think it was all women in their 20s and 30s that she was studying alongside. Most of us will do the English exam system, so the GCSEs and A levels. The big issue there is exam centres. COVID has basically decimated the exam centres in Scotland. But when I first started looking at qualifications for my daughter, like she's 19 now, so when she was like 14, there was actually a really decent number of exam centres. It was actually, oh, this is actually not going to be as bad as I thought. And now there are two that do a really wide range and one that does a narrow range.
That's it in the whole of Scotland. 3
Yeah.
exam centres. And where are they based, so that our listeners would know?
So the Russian Centre, the Russian Centre in Glasgow, they do all the Edexcel exams, and they have started doing some AQA exams, but they prefer. I was messaging the woman that's in charge there. She's absolutely lovely. She's really accommodating. She was saying that they prefer working at Excel because they're a bigger exam board, and their systems are just better for her. And then you've got Glen Almond School. It's a private school up near Perth, and they do all exam boards, apart from the Scottish ones. They don't do SQA, but they also don't do special accommodations. So if your child needs extra time or they need a scribe, they wouldn't be able to facilitate that. But they do actually do every board, which is fantastic. So they're the only place in Scotland that would, for example, do Cambridge exams. And then there's a place in Edinburgh that do Basil Patterson in Edinburgh. They do maths from the Scottish Qualifications Association, so they'll do Nat 5, Higher Maths and Advanced Higher Maths, and they do some Edexcel exams as well. But they're quite small, so last year when I tried to book my son in to do his maths exam, they were already fully booked, so we had to go through to Glasgow for that, which was annoying because we're just outside Edinburgh. That's an issue, so the fact that that's a place, it's just up the road, but I couldn't get my son in there. And other places have just closed. One place went bust over COVID. They did everything, and they did A levels. And the week before the registration for exams cut off, they went bust, and we had to scramble to find an exam centre, and ended up having to go down to the exam centre outside Durham for her A level exams, which was
stressful.
It was very stressful. And yeah. So yeah, the exams, the hours I spent looking and trying to problem solve exam problems over COVID was just ridiculous.
It also sounds very expensive, in as much as I know that we used an exam centre in Bristol, and it was always a bit of a drive. It was about an hour and a half. But then when we moved to Wales, I kept using them because they're very good, and it became really quite a long drive. And so we, quite often for morning exams, we had to stay overnight. Now, I know because my son's just done his A-levels, my daughter had some GCSEs, I felt like I was living in Bristol. I was there that often. It cost me £1,500 just in hotel accommodation, Airbnb accommodation, that kind of thing. So if you're having to, because you must have to stay where the exam centres are because you're so far away, it's frustrating to me because it feels like money again then becomes an obstacle to children getting their exams.
It absolutely does. So we've had to so for my son, actually, he needed that as well. We spread exams out because for the Perthshire exams, he did geography with Cambridge, and he also did the English IGCSE with Cambridge. So the geography exams were all in the morning, so I was not going to even risk trying to get through the Edinburgh City bypass, which is just a nightmare, and then up to Perthshire at rush hour. I was not going to put myself through that stress, my son through that stress, when anything could happen and we'd be late. So we had to stay overnight in Perthshire and then actually a friend offered. We ended up for one of them. We stayed at a friend's house, so that was good because it reduced. Because like one of his exams was during a bank holiday weekend, and the travel lodge basically increased £50. And like, same even Glasgow, though it's not geographically they're not far, but if you've got a morning exam and you're having to navigate central belt traffic, you're just not going to do that when there's an exam at stake. So we stayed, even though Glasgow is very commutable for us. For a morning exam, we stayed overnight in a Premier Inn travel lodge place. So you're right, the cost goes up, the fuel cost goes up. When we stayed in, obviously for Durham, we actually did travel down for afternoon exams. We left at like 9 o'clock in the morning because it was south of the exam centre. Durham isn't in Durham, it's south of Durham. So the afternoon exams, we did travel because it just gets ridiculously expensive. Plus adding in the diesel, you've paid a lot of money, especially for A-level exams, they're expensive. The money just flies out as you're paying all these. And if you think we're Edinburgh, we're in like the central part of Scotland. We should not have this kind of struggle. If you were home educating in some really remote rural place, it must be horrendously expensive. I know Carlisle also has an exam centre, which, because of the geography, that's actually quite far for us. It's further, I think, than the Durham one would be. But I know families have travelled down to the Carlisle exam centre. I think if you were more west, that would actually work out quite well there.
Is there any sign of any more exam centres opening in Scotland? I mean, are Tutors and Exams, which is like a big chain in England, are they due to open up, or is there any sign of any help here with this?
I've not heard of any. As I said, though, the fact that the Highlands and Islands University they've actually got a specific place on their website for home educators now, and a whole list of courses that are open to home educators, and a significant number of them are virtual learning. The Highlands and Islands University have been really pioneering in digital education because they wanted to keep skilled, educated young people in the Highlands, because they were having basically a brain drain to the south of Scotland or beyond, because they didn't have the education facilities. So they created this university with a real emphasis on digital education, so that students from across the region were able to access higher education without having to move down to Edinburgh, Glasgow, or Aberdeen. And so that this technology and their ideas are really now just starting to filter into the home educating community. So I think I'm hoping that's going to be a bit of a game changer in the coming years, to see how they do it. Aberdeen University also has, and I think this would be open to anyone across the UK, Aberdeen University have online qualifications which are not SQA, but they're equivalent courses within the frame. There's a Scottish qualifications framework where all qualifications that you can gain are given a different level, and so though it's not a Nat 5 or a higher, it sits in equivalence to those qualifications.
And that would then get you into Aberdeen University, I'm assuming.
Or any university.
Do many people in Scotland sit the American high school diploma, which obviously doesn't require exams? And I know that the Scottish universities, certainly during COVID, and I think it still holds true, that they actually accept just the high school diploma. They don't ask for SATs and APs and stuff like that.
That is something that is growing. So we're getting more and more families doing the high school diploma model. You would still need an SAT. to be able to have on your high school diploma. But a lot of universities don't require AP exams. They will give you admission with a good high school transcript and with honours courses attached to that. My friend and I actually started a business called Arise Home Education, and my friend Shannon, she's actually American, and she really specialises in helping home educators across the UK gain a high school diploma for their kids. Her daughter got into Aberdeen University with her high school diploma and her SAT exam, and she didn't do any AP exams. So that was like the cost to sit an SAT exam compared to a GCSE is ridiculous. It's like so much. Like I'm like throwing money out. But our daughters are similar ages. I'm like, money's leaving my bank account at eye-watering rates, and she's won. I think it was like about £90, £100 maybe. £100 to sit the SAT, and then she had her high school diploma, and that got her an unconditional for Aberdeen University.
Wonderful. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
and we're seeing it more and more.
yeah, and I do know that the universities there are very open to the American route. Okay, that's interesting because I didn't know about the Highlands and the Islands University, so that's something that's really interesting. You mentioned about access arrangements when you were talking about exams, and just briefly before we finish, I wanted to ask you about children with special educational needs, or I'm assuming it probably has a different name there because I know it's additional learning needs, I think, in Wales. So is there a difference when it comes to home educating if your child has autism, for example, or ADHD? Is it such that you have EHCPs there? Do you get any extra support when you home educate, or is it harder to home educate? How does it work? Do you know?
There's no extra support. Basically, it says that families who have children with additional support needs can go to the local authority and they can ask for help, but the local authority has no, they don't need to give you any help. It's if they want to, they can help you, but they don't have to help you. A lot of families with additional support needs do struggle getting the help they need. They struggle getting the assessments, the diagnosis. I've got friends whose kids have been on waiting lists for years to get the diagnosis that they need. Many families end up going private. A friend of mine, for her son who needed help with additional time for exams, they had to pay hundreds of pounds to get him privately assessed. So again, you've got this barrier, which is a very big economic barrier for families who, if you can afford, or if you've got family who can help financially to gain those independent assessments or independent therapy and help and need, that's great. But most families don't have, because these things often, if you put additional support needs on something, the price just goes through the roof, and so most families can't afford that, and so there is that, again, that discrimination that comes in, that families are left just kind of struggling along. But a lot of families see that just being out of the school system is so beneficial to their kids, that removal of that stress and that those really negative aspects of the school system have been taken away. But it's hard because the system is broken, and it's broken for everyone. It's broken not just for home educators, it's broken for kids in schools as well. The waiting lists are horrendous for anything to do with additional support needs and mental health needs as well.
Yeah, I think that's the same UK wide. I feel like it's one of those things that is we're gonna look back in hindsight and look back at this period in our history as one where we really fail a huge amount of children and adults actually in the way that we provide support for them. Okay, so I know that you mentioned that as well as having 7 children that you home educate, you're also running a business, which is frankly a little bit terrifying for me. So do tell our listeners a little bit about the business that you run.
So we started Arise Home Education just over a year ago, and we've had a couple of conferences. We also do online live classes for high school kids. So we've got literature classes, history, geography, Art's been really I think art might be close to being full this year. It's been really popular. Maths classes and science classes. And we also do on self-paced classes, and we have a whole range of resources, printable PDFs and ebooks and stuff. And as I said, Shannon, who is originally from Oregon, but she's actually home educated more years in Scotland than she did in the States. She really specialises in helping families to gain the US high school diploma. And she has built out a whole course with how to basically create a university attractive diploma, and what elements you need, because I think it's so different to what we do in the UK. And just she walks families through how this is what you need. You need to have what the credits are, what credits you need to constitute a high school diploma. How do you go about building it? What don't you need? Yeah, so she's fantastic, and I say that's gaining in so much popularity now because of all the reasons I just said about how hard it is to gain qualifications for your child here.
And where can our listeners find you on social media? I'm assuming your website is Arise Home Education.
Yes, and we've also got a Facebook page, Arise Home Education on Facebook, and there is an Instagram page as well, Arise Home Ed on Instagram. We are on YouTube as well, the same YouTube channel. We're not on TikTok, or that's our social media places. I think I'm too old to learn TikTok.
Too scary. It's scary.
Yeah,
TikTok.
I don't want to do TikTok.
My 16-year-old daughter, she always says when I mention TikTok, she's like, yeah, it's great, but it's very scary. I'm like, okay, I probably won't go on it then.
I think it would convince me just to completely check out of modern society and just go and live in the woods.
I feel like that most. Yeah, I feel like that most of the time anyway. Well, thank you so much, Emma. It's been lovely talking to you today and hearing about how home education in Scotland, the similarities and the differences. So thank you so much for guiding us through that.
Thank you for having us on. It's been lovely to chat to you.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.